Victor Hale's name was never meant to be spoken out loud, yet echoed quietly through the lives of powerful figures who shaped technology, politics, and media without ever appearing in the same room. From the polished public image of tech visionary Adrian Cross, to the carefully managed legacy of political titan Raymond Holt, to journalist Meera Nair's dangerous pursuit of buried facts, each name connected to Hale carried a secret weight. What began as scattered anomalies, missing records, erased schedules, silent headlines, slowly formed a chilling pattern that suggested one disturbing truth. The most dangerous crimes were not hidden in darkness, but protected in plain sight by influence, distraction, and carefully engineered silence. Victor Hale did not begin life as a monster hidden behind wealth and power. He started as an ambitious outsider who understood one simple rule early on. Information was more valuable than money. Born into an ordinary family, Hale learned to observe people closely, memorizing their weaknesses, ambitions, and secrets. By the time he entered the world of high finance, he had already mastered the art of appearing harmless while collecting leverage. His rise was quiet but calculated. He funded startups that failed publicly but succeeded privately by placing influential names in compromising situations. He donated to charities that opened doors to elite gatherings, where reputations mattered more than morality. Hale never chased fame. Instead, he positioned himself as a connector, a man who could make problems disappear and opportunities appear overnight. Those who crossed his path rarely understood the true cost of accepting his help. Private islands, unregistered aircraft, and discreet properties became tools rather than luxuries. These locations were carefully chosen to exist outside normal scrutiny. Every visit was recorded, not in official logs, but in encrypted files Hale kept close. These records were insurance. Anyone powerful who entered his world unknowingly surrendered control over their own future. What made Hale dangerous was not violence, but patience. He waited years before using what he collected. Careers rose or collapsed based on whether loyalty was maintained. Investigations stalled before they began. Whistleblowers found themselves discredited, isolated, or legally buried. Hale's influence spread silently, blending into systems meant to protect the public. To the outside world, he was a philanthropist with a charming smile. To those inside his circle, he was unavoidable. Victor Hale was not just a man at the center of a scandal yet to be exposed. He was the architect of a hidden structure where power protected itself and truth was treated. As records slowly emerged, the investigation shifted from focusing on one individual to examining a much larger structure. What initially appeared as random associations began forming a consistent pattern. Flight paths overlapped. Donations moved through identical shell foundations. Calendar gaps matched across unrelated public figures. These were not coincidences, but signs of coordination designed to appear accidental to anyone looking only once. Analysts discovered that many of Victor Hale's connections never met in public. Instead, they were rotated through the same locations at different times. Private residences, charter jets, and invitation-only retreats served as neutral ground where discretion was guaranteed. Security staff were outsourced and replaced frequently, preventing any single person from seeing the entire picture. Each participant believed they were an exception, unaware they were part of a broader system. Financial trails revealed deeper intent. Money flowed outward from Hale's accounts, then returned through layered investments, political donations, and research grants. These transactions created loyalty without leaving direct fingerprints. Institutions that received funding later became obstacles for investigators, citing legal boundaries and confidentiality agreements. Oversight collapsed not through force, but through compliance. Digital archives told another story. Emails referenced events without details. Attachments were encrypted or missing. Servers were wiped during routine maintenance. Backup systems failed at convenient moments. Each technical failure appeared minor, but together they erased context, leaving only fragments that hinted at something deliberately hidden. What became clear was that Hale had built a self-protecting ecosystem. Power shielded power. Influence defended influence. Anyone attempting to pull one thread faced resistance from multiple directions at once. The network was not maintained by fear alone. Among the many names buried inside partial records, one figure drew unusual attention because of how carefully his trail had been cleaned. He was a technology visionary celebrated worldwide for innovation, global health initiatives, and promises of a better future. His public image was constructed around progress and generosity, making any association with Victor Hale seem unthinkable at first glance. Yet traces remained, faint but persistent, surfacing where erasure had not been perfect. Archive schedules showed brief overlaps between the visionary's international travel and Hale's private gatherings. The meetings were never listed as official and never acknowledged afterward. What remained were gaps, days missing from calendars, flights logged without passengers, and donations routed through intermediaries that dissolved soon after completing their purpose. Each detail alone meant little. Together, they suggested deliberate concealment rather than coincidence. Former employees from overlapping institutions described a pattern of unusual caution during those periods. Internal emails were abruptly shortened. Security protocols increased without explanation. Legal teams reviewed documents that posed no obvious risk. These behaviors aligned precisely with moments when Hale's network was most active, implying prior awareness rather than accidental contact. What made this connection disturbing was not proof of a crime, but evidence of protection. When independent researchers attempted to follow the financial paths, access was blocked by non-disclosure agreements and jurisdictional barriers. Requests stalled indefinitely. Databases were updated, overwriting earlier versions. The system did not deny involvement. It simply ensured the question could never be fully answered. This chapter of the investigation revealed something critical. Influence did not need to silence truth aggressively. It only needed to surround it with complexity. The visionary remained untouched. The political figure connected to Victor Hale carried a legacy built on public rallies, national promises, and relentless media attention. His career thrived on visibility, making his appearance in sealed records especially unsettling. Unlike others who operated quietly, this individual lived under constant scrutiny, yet entire periods of his timeline appeared strangely undocumented. Investigators noticed that during key moments of Hale's activity, the politician's movements were either vaguely recorded or explained away through broad statements that lacked detail. Archived travel manifests revealed overlapping locations that were never mentioned in official reports. Private accommodations replaced public hotels. Security teams were reassigned without explanation. Staff rotations occurred abruptly, ensuring no consistent witness remained long enough to notice irregularities. These changes were framed as routine, but their timing aligned too precisely with Hale's private events to ignore. Publicly released documents told a different story. Press briefings emphasized transparency while quietly avoiding specifics. When journalists requested clarification, responses arrived late or not at all. Legal representatives intervened early, warning of defamation and national security concerns. The result was hesitation. Questions softened. Stories lost momentum before reaching the public. What stood out most was the speed at which scrutiny dissolved. Potential inquiries were overshadowed by new controversies, political drama, and constant cycles of breaking news. Attention shifted, and unresolved details slipped into obscurity. Hale's name never surfaced directly, yet his influence could be felt in the absence of answers. This phase of the investigation suggested that political power did not need to erase evidence entirely. It only needed to redirect focus. By controlling narratives and timing, uncomfortable connections were buried beneath louder headlines. The role of the media became impossible to ignore once patterns of silence emerged. Stories connected to Victor Hale followed a predictable path. They appeared suddenly, gained brief attention, and then vanished without explanation. Articles were edited after publication, removing key details. Entire investigations were quietly shelved under vague claims of insufficient verification, even when documents existed to support them. Independent journalist Meera Nair traced these disappearances across multiple outlets. She noticed that suppression rarely came as direct censorship. Instead, it arrived through subtle pressure. Editors received legal warnings before facts were challenged. Advertisers expressed concern at critical moments. Anonymous complaints questioned credibility rather than content. Each action alone seemed reasonable, but together they dismantled momentum. Digital evidence revealed further manipulation. Archived web pages showed altered timestamps and rewritten paragraphs. Search results buried original reports beneath unrelated content. Social media algorithms reduced visibility without explanation. As public interest faded, so did the urgency to pursue unanswered questions. Silence replaced curiosity. Nair discovered that several media organizations shared financial links to institutions previously funded by Hale's network. These connections were never disclosed publicly. Editorial independence existed in theory, but influence moved quietly behind administrative decisions. No one ordered silence. It simply became the safest option. What shocked investigators most was how effective this system proved to be. Once the press hesitated, other institutions followed. Law enforcement delayed responses. Regulatory agencies cited lack of public concern. Without sustained attention, accountability weakened. The media did not protect Hale directly. It protected stability, reputation, and access. In doing so, it allowed uncertainty to replace truth. It surfaced briefly within the fragments of data, then disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. This individual was known globally as a disruptive innovator, someone who challenged governments, reshaped industries, and spoke openly about the future of humanity. His reputation was built on boldness and transparency, which made the faint traces linking him to Victor Hale's orbit feel out of place and carefully minimized. The records did not describe meetings or events in detail. Instead, they showed logistical overlaps that defied randomness. Aircraft registered to holding companies connected to Hale were serviced at the same private terminals used by the innovator's fleet. Temporary staff contracts aligned with dates when both parties were known to be off the public schedule. These moments were brief, almost invisible, yet repeated just enough to suggest intent rather than chance. What followed was more revealing than the fragments themselves. Every attempt to explore these overlaps met immediate complexity. Corporate structures led to other corporations. Jurisdictions overlapped in ways that delayed cooperation. Requests for clarification were met with technical explanations that answered nothing directly. The trail did not end abruptly. It dissolved into layers designed to exhaust anyone pursuing it. Observers noted a familiar pattern. The innovator's public persona thrived on controversy, generating constant headlines that drowned out quieter questions. Bold announcements, market shifts, and viral moments kept attention focused forward, never backward. In this environment, subtle associations slipped past unnoticed. This part of the investigation reinforced a central theme. Power did not always rely on secrecy alone. Sometimes it relied on noise. By dominating the public conversation, uncomfortable details became irrelevant before they could be examined. Whether intentional or incidental, the result was the same. The end of Victor Hale's life arrived without warning, yet the aftermath unfolded with unsettling speed. Authorities announced that he had been found dead inside a secured residence, and within hours the narrative was fixed. Official statements emphasized isolation, personal struggle, and a clear conclusion. The public was told there was nothing more to examine. The case, they said, was closed. Details that should have raised concern were framed as routine. Surveillance cameras had malfunctioned during critical hours. Security personnel failed to complete standard checks. Logs were incomplete, then later marked as corrupted. Each flaw was acknowledged individually, but never connected. When viewed together, They painted a picture of failure, so complete it bordered on orchestration. Evidence that might have complicated the story was sealed almost immediately. Documents were classified. Access was restricted under procedural justifications. Requests for independent review were denied on technical grounds. The urgency to conclude the case outweighed the responsibility to understand it. Speed replaced scrutiny. What followed was more revealing than the death itself. Ongoing investigations linked to Hale were quietly suspended. Subpoenas expired. Witnesses were informed their cooperation was no longer required. Financial inquiries lost funding. It became clear that Hale's death had not triggered accountability, but containment. Public reaction faded quickly. Headlines moved on. Commentators framed the event as the tragic end of a disturbed individual rather than the collapse of a dangerous system. The narrative reduced complexity to convenience, allowing unresolved questions to sink beneath the surface. In the end, Hale's absence changed very little. The network he had cultivated did not unravel. It adjusted. Power redistributed itself smoothly, as if prepared for this moment all along. His death closed a chapter, but it did not deliver truth. Instead, it ensured. Years after Victor Hale's death, the fragments of his world continued to surface in unexpected places. Old files appeared on forgotten servers. Archived web pages briefly reemerged before disappearing again. Anonymous accounts released partial documents that raised more questions than they answered. Each revelation hinted at a larger truth, but none were complete enough to force action. The past remained present, yet unreachable. Researchers attempting to reconstruct the full picture faced deliberate obstacles. Key records were missing or permanently altered. Witnesses recanted or declined further involvement. Legal barriers prevented cross-border cooperation. Time itself became a weapon, eroding urgency and dulling public memory. What once felt explosive now seemed distant, almost theoretical. The most unsettling realization was that no final exposure was necessary for the system to survive. Institutions adapted. Policies were rewritten. Oversight committees restructured themselves while preserving the same power dynamics. The appearance of reform replaced genuine accountability. Progress was announced, but nothing fundamental changed. Public attention shifted toward new scandals, new villains, and new distractions. The story of Victor Hale faded into niche discussions and late-night forums. Without constant visibility, truth lost its force. Silence did not erase facts, but stripped them of consequence. What remained was a lesson rather than a resolution. The real danger had never been one man or one crime. It was a structure that allowed influence to override transparency and complexity to defeat justice. The truth was not buried because it was unknown. It was buried because confronting it would have required challenging power that extended far beyond a single name. In the end, the file was never truly closed. It was simply set aside, unfinished, waiting for a moment when truth would matter more than comfort, and when silence would no longer be mistaken.